Hello listeners, welcome back to Luke's English podcast. So here is a brand new episode for you, and there's a PDF for this one. You can get the PDF on the episode page for this episode on my website, or just click the link that you'll find in the episode description, right? If you're listening to this in a podcast app, you should be able to find some text that goes with this episode. That's called the episode show notes or the episode description. Right, and you'll see a link in there for the PDF. That's where you get it. If you're watching this on YouTube, check the episode description. You know what that means, don't you? And you'll find the link for the PDF there if you want. And it's basically a transcript of the stuff that you're going to hear me saying in the episode. I've prepared this one. I've spent time on this one and prepared a lot of stuff in advance that I will be reading from. So you can check out all that stuff that I'm reading from if you want to. You could try to read it at the same time as listening to me, or you could just check it later if you want to go through it and check out all the words and phrases that came up, or if you want to revisit the information that came up in the episode or whatever. It's all there for you. There's lots of things you could do with that to help you with your English. You'll see certain bits of vocabulary highlighted in yellow. I'll be explaining those things quite quickly as we go through the episode, but there's some vocab for you to work with. This episode is going to be quite in-depth, and we're covering subjects like history and psychology and communication and podcasts in this episode. So yeah, you can get the PDF if you want to. This could be quite a long episode, but that's good, isn't it? We like that. We like a good long episode of this podcast. Don't feel that you have to listen to it all in one go. You know, you could just stop and live your life, come back to the episode, and YouTube or a podcast app will remember where you stopped, and you can just carry on from where you paused. I'm actually going to set myself a 30-minute timer in order to remind me to drink precious water. H2O, my favourite molecule. Is it my I think it is my favourite I'm going to say water is my favourite substance. What would I do without it? I know I would die, basically, like all humans. Anyway, I'm going to set a 30-minute timer to remind me to drink some water. So let me do that now. Siri, set a 30-minute timer, please. Okay, Siri's doing it silently. Normally Siri replies to me, but no, not at the moment. Right, the 30-minute timer is going. That'll go off in 30 minutes, and then I'll drink some water. Right, let's get into this then. I'm going to start reading from the PDF and get the episode started properly in 3, 2, 1. Pew, here we go. So this is episode number 925. No, it's not. It's episode 926. 926. Anyway. Carry on. And it's called Oral Storytelling Traditions and the Mental Health Benefits of Listening to Podcasts. Quite a long title, but it pretty much sums up the content of the episode. Oral Storytelling Traditions and the Mental Health Benefits of Listening to Podcasts. Here's an episode overview. So in this episode, I will mostly be reading out some articles about the tradition of mass oral communication, human psychology, and listening to podcasts, and considering what the connection is between these three things. And I'll be explaining and highlighting some vocabulary, especially different ways of talking about communication. So plenty of lovely, useful vocab on this diverse subject. The language style in this episode is a mix of general English and academic English. It's exactly the kind of thing that could come up in an IELTS reading or listening paper. The overall topics being history, psychology, culture, and communication. Exactly the sort of thing that you get in an IELTS test. This might end up being quite a long and deep episode, so strap in, buckle up, and make sure you have some water and snacks available to make sure that you don't become a skeleton with some headphones on by the end of the episode. First of all, let me explain how I came up with the idea for this episode. So this is the sort of introduction to it. As an avid podcast listener myself, meaning someone who loves to listen to podcasts a lot, I am an avid podcast listener. So as an avid podcast listener myself, as well as podcast maker, of course, I was thinking the other day about how listening to podcasts could be good for your mental health and how a lot of my listeners in comments mention that listening to my podcast doesn't just help with their English, but also with their general state of mind too. Is that true for you? Hopefully the podcast helps with your English, but do you find any other benefits from listening to the episodes too? In fact, does it give you a sense of comfort and well-being at all? A lot of people tell me that listening to these episodes makes them feel comforted, reassured, not distracted by racing thoughts or anxiety, that it's a way to stay calm and focused, and also that it helps them to fall asleep. And I'm not sure how I feel about that last bit, to be honest, but I suppose it's good, isn't it? You know, insomnia is a terrible thing. Anyway, as a podcast listener myself, I completely understand, because this is how I feel about listening to my favourite shows as well. And my favourite podcasts include the Adam Buxton podcast and Kermode and Mayo's Take. Those are just names of two of my favourite podcasts at the moment. And it's true, there is something very comforting about listening to your favourite podcast, especially the audio versions, I would say, where you are free to listen while doing something else, like commuting to work and back, or doing housework, or you can just close your eyes and let your imagination take over. So that's particularly with audio episodes. And this made me wonder and speculate about whether there is something innately reassuring and healthy about listening to podcasts. And I think there is. Right? I think there is something genuinely comforting and reassuring about this medium. And I was speculating that this must somehow fit in with old oral storytelling traditions which go back thousands and thousands of years, and how our minds have been shaped by this tradition of listening to others talk, especially the ancient traditions of oral storytelling, which are so much older than any written literature. And I thought about how crucial this must have been to human development, and that surely this is a very important thing for humans to do, to listen to the voices of others collectively. And this was probably our first form of transmitting information and teaching or learning before reading and writing, and before so many other forms of communication, except probably music. And therefore it must be so deeply rooted in us, must be so profoundly part of who we are as humans, that perhaps listening to others talk can fill a sort of need that many of us have in our lives somehow, where our brains are attuned to learning in that way and to connecting with others, our common culture and our collective human experience. So just that. That's more or less what I was thinking the other day, all expressed in one extremely long sentence, by the way. But this all made me think that perhaps podcasts fulfill this function somehow, and this might account for why they are so popular. What do you think? Is there anything in it? Podcasts are interesting because listening to one is a very intimate experience, right? We usually do it alone, and often with headphones on, creating a very close and personal feeling. But it's also an experience that creates a feeling of connection to the podcaster, but also to the other members of the audience or community. Most successful podcasts manage to build a sense of community so that when you listen, you feel part of something. So it's a communal experience while simultaneously being a very solitary and intimate experience, which is interesting. And using my podcast as an example, I know that many of my listeners find particular comfort in listening to my episodes, which is great. As I said before, people write this in comments and tell me in emails, and I've had various emails which specifically mentioned this, about how the podcast has not only helped them with their English, but has comforted them at a difficult time, and has even helped to mend their brains, which sounds a bit over the top, but I think it's true. One listener, for example, talked about how my podcast helped her recover from brain surgery. Right, she had brain surgery and she listened to my podcast a lot in the hospital during her recovery, and she believed that it really helped to kind of get her brain kind of up and running again. So there was her, can't remember her name, it was a few years ago. And of course, there was the example of Iñaki from episode number 799, who found that my podcast helped him to recover from the extreme mental anguish, anxiety, and confusion that he experienced following a particularly bad reaction to a general what happened to my voice? I don't know. It's difficult to say the next word. Iñaki, did you hear episode 799? He found that my podcast helped him to recover from the extreme mental anguish, anxiety and confusion that he experienced following a particularly bad reaction to a general anaesthetic in hospital. Do you remember that? Have you heard that episode? He seemed to wake up early from his general anaesthetic, or at least woke up badly from it after a routine surgery, and he experienced a sort of very bad trip, which I understand can be a common reaction to general anaesthetic. It's something that happens sometimes. People have sort of bad reactions that cause quite horrible experiences. So Iñaki described huge levels of anxiety, paranoia, disorientation, and even visual and auditory hallucinations. He felt convinced he was going to die and that the people around him were lying to him. But when his girlfriend suggested that he listen to my podcast, this is amazingly what helped him to calm down and gain a sense of mental comfort and well-being during his ordeal. You can listen to his story in episode 799. Now, I'm using my podcast as an example here of the sort of comforting power of podcasts, but it could be any podcast really. I'm just using mine as an example, right? And I have to say that for me, doing these episodes has been therapeutic as well, right? I'm also a therapeutic and beneficial experience for me as the maker of the podcasts too. So I was thinking about all of that the other day, right? And what I wanted was some kind of article to summarize and put into words all these thoughts that were swirling around in my head. And I couldn't find anything that really summed it up as I was thinking about it. And in my curiosity, I asked ChatGPT, of course. I asked ChatGPT a few questions about all of this stuff that I was thinking about, right? Because I needed to kind of collate it all together in some sort of single cohesive article. Like an article would have been great, because I wanted to do this episode of the podcast. Now, I know that there is still pushback from some people when you mention that you've used ChatGPT to do something because of various reasons. People see it sometimes, or people can see it as a form of cheating, right? Don't you think there's still a little bit of a kind of slight sense of, I don't know what it is, like mistrust? Or I understand, I totally understand, because it's the complex thing about AI and the place that it has in our culture. And we, I think, prefer human-generated content. And there's also that thing about ChatGPT or similar things in the academic world. And there's a big problem with that, which is that it's sort of undermining a lot of the academic work that students do. And the fact that if they're given essays to write, a lot of students cheat using ChatGPT these days, and it's a problem, and universities, the academic world is struggling to come to terms with the impact of it. So anyway, I understand that there's like a somewhat negative association with ChatGPT, but, from the point of view of an English teacher like me, it is an incredible tool that I can use to essentially put language into context, as I'm going to say. So people can see it as a form of cheating or something, but I'm not cheating in an exam here or anything like that. Also, some people are skeptical about it and want us to avoid relying on it too much. I understand that, but as an English teacher, it can be a very useful tool because it can provide quick and efficient samples of English on any given topic in any style, as I've demonstrated previously in episodes of this podcast. And what I wanted when I was thinking about this particular episode of Luke's English podcast was a sort of simulated set of articles which would flesh out the vague ideas that I had in my head, right? And it's an exercise in English. I wanted to see some texts which put into words all the things I was thinking about the power of podcasting and how it's connected to ancient forms of human communication and therefore human psychology. I just wanted some coherent texts on this subject which I could use as the basis of a new podcast episode and as a source of vocabulary to teach you, my listeners, right? So that's what I wanted. And generative AI is particularly good at doing things like this, writing quick articles and texts which contain a lot of frequently used English in the right style. It's the perfect assistant for English teachers for this reason. It generates English in context. So I asked ChatGPT a few questions in order to generate some texts, a bit like a series of articles on different aspects of this subject. Of course, amazingly, it did it instantly. And I thought the texts that were created were very interesting, and they did put into words the things I was thinking, and so I've decided to read them out in this episode and use them as the basis for this episode. So let's do that. And so I'm going to read out those articles, and I'll add my comments while I read, and will explain any bits of language which I think are worth explaining. So there will be vocabulary summaries after each text. Okay, I'll read through the text and then sort of give thoughts and explain vocab. You'll see, as I mentioned earlier, you'll see some vocabulary highlighted in yellow on the PDF if you look at it. That's normally how seeing things works, right? You see things when you look at them. So yeah, you will see some vocab highlighted in yellow on the PDF if you look at it. If you don't look at the PDF, you won't see the vocab. You get the idea. So the bits highlighted in yellow, these are all words and phrases which I'll be clarifying, helping you to notice and pick up. For speaking and pronunciation, you could also practice shadowing me while I read these texts, if you like. That means repeating what I say, either at the same time I say it, or you can pause the episode after each sentence and then repeat like that. You know, hear a sentence, bam, pause, repeat, play, continue. You can look at the text to make sure that you're saying what you think you're saying as well. Just look at the transcript to help make sure that you're doing things correctly. So yeah, I've said this, but here we go again. I'm saying it again. You can find a PDF for this on the episode page, and there's also a link in the description in the podcast app where you're listening to this or on YouTube. Now, let's begin with the first prompt, which I put into ChatGPT 4. And it's basically part one of this, which is the history of oral communication. My prompt was this: what examples of collective oral communication can you give from history showing that it was the first form of mass communication? Right? What examples of collective oral communication can you give from history showing that it was the first form of mass communication? That's the angle I've gone for. And by the way, when I say collective oral communication, I was thinking of things like this, you know, like traveling storytellers who would visit towns and talk to groups of people, someone like Shakespeare in his earlier days, or maybe town criers. And I was thinking of a sort of British context here, English context from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before the printing press was invented, before people relied on the written word as a form of mass communication, you know. And that's, if you think about in history, it's very recent that we've had the written word as the main source of information, right? I mean, obviously these days it's all on the internet, on our computers, our phones and so on. Before the internet, it was in books, magazines, newspapers, the printed word. But that, even that is extremely young, really. We're talking about the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the printing press, which allowed the written word to be disseminated so widely in the developed world to a large extent. That's really recent history when you think about the thousands and thousands of years of human history. So, oral communication has a much deeper and much richer and longer history, and I think must be hand in hand with human development, the developments of society and the development of the human mind, the way that our culture, our psychology, everything. So anyway, British perspective, I was thinking of the sorts of oral communication or mass oral communication that we have or had, in the UK. So I was thinking of, travelling storytellers, town criers who would deliver the news by standing in the centre of a town and just shouting it to everyone, ringing a bell and shouting the news, or maybe shouting new announcements or laws that had been passed by the king or lord or earl or whoever ran that particular part of the country. Town criers. Or even just stories that get handed down from person to person over generations. Every big human myth and legend, all the story tropes, all the typical tropes and archetypes we find in every big film or book, those are all typical stories that actually are in us, that we all carry with us because they've been told again and again and again. They got put down in the form of books and films, but before that, there are story archetypes, typical story structures, which have been with us for centuries and centuries. You think of a film like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, even The Legend of Zelda, Harry Potter. Those stories all share very, very similar themes, and those themes are very old. Right? So those old stories, or all the narratives which we use to understand our lives and cultures, or just the way the story type, or just the story types that we've always told each other because they're entertaining as well as meaningful. So that's what I was thinking of when I was thinking of collective oral communication. But there are many other types, many other examples of this in civilizations all over the world. Okay, so right. Let's see what ChatGPT came up with. This is its article about collective oral communication in history. So, collective oral communication has played a foundational role in human history, serving as the first form of mass communication. Before the advent of writing, print, or electronic media, societies relied on spoken words to transmit information, culture, and values across large groups. Here are some significant historical examples that illustrate how collective oral communication functioned as the first form of mass communication. Number 1, oral storytelling traditions. Ancient epics and myths. In many ancient cultures, stories were passed down orally before they were ever written. For instance, the Iliad and the Odyssey, attributed to Homer, were part of the oral tradition of ancient Greece long before they were transcribed. Similarly, the Mahabharata and Ramayana in India and the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia were initially conveyed through oral storytelling. These stories were not only entertaining, but also served as a way to transmit cultural values, history, and collective identity. African griots. Griots are West African storytellers, historians, and musicians who have preserved the history and culture of their people through oral tradition for centuries. They recount genealogies, historical events, and cultural stories, ensuring that the knowledge is passed down through generations. This oral tradition played a critical role in maintaining social cohesion and continuity within communities. Number 2, public speeches and oratory. Athenian democracy. In ancient Athens, public speaking was central to the functioning of democracy. Citizens would gather in public spaces like the pnics to listen to orators debate issues of public policy, law and justice. These speeches, delivered to large audiences, were a form of mass communication that influenced public opinion and political decisions. Famous orators like Pericles and Demosthenes used their rhetorical skills to persuade and mobilize the masses. Roman Senate and Fora. In ancient Rome, the Senate and public forums, or fora, were places where speeches were delivered to large audiences. Leaders, politicians, and philosophers would address the public on matters of state, law, and military campaigns. Cicero, one of Rome's greatest orators, used public speeches to sway the opinions of the Roman people and the Senate, showcasing the power of collective oral communication in shaping society. And then 3, religious sermons and teachings. Jesus' sermons. The teachings of Jesus Christ were spread through oral communication before they were written down in the Gospels. Sermons like the Sermon on the Mount were delivered to large crowds and had a profound impact on the early Christian community. This oral dissemination of religious teachings played a key role in the spread of Christianity across the Roman Empire. Islamic preaching. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad orally, and he recited it to his followers. His sermons and teachings were also delivered orally and memorized by his companions. The practice of oral recitation remains central in Islamic traditions, where sermons, khutbah, that is, during Friday prayers and religious festivals, continue to be important forms of collective oral communication. And 4, rituals and ceremonial chants. Indigenous oral traditions. Many indigenous cultures around the world, including Native American, Aboriginal, Australian and Maori cultures, rely on oral traditions to pass down myths, laws and cultural practices. These are often shared during ceremonies, rituals and communal gatherings, where stories and chants are recited to the entire community, ensuring that the collective memory and cultural identity are preserved. Vedic chants. In ancient India, the Vedas, that's sacred texts, were transmitted orally for centuries before being written down. Vedic chanting, a highly specialized form of oral communication, involved precise recitation of verses during rituals and ceremonies. These chants were memorized and passed down through generations, serving as a means of mass communication within the religious community. And 5th, town criers and public announcements. Medieval Europe. Before the widespread use of the printing press, town criers were responsible for disseminating information to the public. These individuals would walk through towns, loudly proclaiming royal decrees, news and public announcements. This was a vital form of mass communication, as it ensured that even those who were illiterate could receive important information. African drum communication. In various African cultures, drums were used to send messages across long distances. Drum patterns communicated specific messages that could be understood by those familiar with the system. This form of oral communication, is this oral communication? It's drum based, isn't it? Anyway, musical communication, surely. Anyway, this form of communication allowed leaders to relay messages to large groups of people over vast areas, serving as a form of mass communication. And then 6, there's how many parts to this are? Okay, there's 7. So the 6th part is about theatre, theatrical performances and public entertainment. Greek and Roman theatre. In ancient Greece and Rome, theatrical performances were not just entertainment, but also a means of communicating societal values, political ideas, and moral lessons to large audiences. Plays by writers like Sophocles, Aristophanes, and Plautus were performed in open-air theatres where hundreds or even thousands of people would gather. These performances were a collective experience that shaped public discourse and cultural norms. And medieval mystery and morality plays. During the Middle Ages, And we'll be learning more about the Middle Ages probably in the next episode. Little clue as to what's coming next time. But anyway, during the Middle Ages, mystery and morality plays were performed in public spaces, often as part of religious festivals. So plays, performances on stage, right? These are plays. So mystery plays or morality plays were performed in public spaces, often as part of religious festivals. These plays communicated biblical stories and moral lessons to the masses, serving both educational and religious purposes. The oral performance of these plays was a powerful way to reach large audiences who may not have had access to written texts. And then part 7, epic poems and bardic traditions. For example, the Anglo-Saxon Beowulf, which is an ancient Anglo-Saxon poem, a fantastic story about a kind of warrior king called Beowulf doing battle with horrible monsters and dragons and things. So the Anglo-Saxon Beowulf, before it was written down, Beowulf was part of the oral tradition of the Anglo-Saxons. Bards, or scops, would recite the poem in the mead halls of kings, entertaining and educating the audience with tales of heroism, loyalty and honour. This tradition of oral poetry was a way to communicate shared values and history to large groups. Celtic bards. God, it just goes on and on, doesn't it? Let me just read through. Okay, we're nearly at the end of the article. Celtic bards. That's Celtic, not Celtic. Celtic is a football club, but Celtic is the adjective. So Celtic bards. In Celtic cultures, bards were professional poets and storytellers who preserved and communicated the history and legends of their people. Through their recitations of epic poems, genealogies and stories, bards played a crucial role in maintaining cultural continuity and educating the masses. So the conclusion of all this then is this. These examples demonstrate that collective oral communication was the first form of mass communication in human history. Through storytelling, public speaking, religious teachings, rituals and performances, early societies were able to transmit information, culture and values to large groups of people. This tradition laid the groundwork for later forms of mass communication such as written texts, print media and digital platforms, and continues to influence modern communication practices, including podcasts. So in the days before any kind of technology, instead of listening to a podcast, you would just go and just listen to a person speaking. Instead of going onto social media, there would just be a guy shouting stuff in the town centre. You know, that's my timer going off, which is quite appropriate considering we are at the end of the article. It's time for me to hydrate before we go any further. You could do the same thing, maybe. Just a reminder, don't forget to drink your plenty of water every day. How many litres of water are we supposed to drink every day? It's something ridiculous, like 7 litres of water or something. But anyway, let me have some now. We'll have a little water break here. Okay. Very refreshing. Okay. So, I don't think I need to go back through that article because I think it was pretty clear, right? That conclusion said it all. That before we had all this technology, just various forms of oral communication that you could see in different cultures around the world did a very important job in the development of human culture and human society, which is essentially spreading single messages to many people, creating a sense of community, creating a sense of unity, cohesion and continuity. Right. Media is obviously so important in the way that we understand ourselves, the narratives that are built. Okay, so what we can do now is just have a look at some of the vocab that was in that article, right? Some of the stuff that was in yellow. And this is where we can actually get into the language. As well as talking about the topic, we can just have a good look at some vocabulary here. So here are some extracts with the target bits of vocabulary that I'm looking at. So collective oral communication has played a foundational role in human history. So to play a role, play an important role in something, meaning that you play a role in a stage play, right? But if all the world's a stage, then certain things can also play a role in other things, not just in a play, but in this case in human history. So they had a very important place or a very important function. Oral communication has had a very important function in human history. It's played a foundational role. Foundational relates to the noun a foundation. The foundation is the thing, the thing that you build something on. If you build a house, first you need a good foundation. I think what they do these days is they dig a hole in the ground and fill it full of concrete, like make a hole that's kind of square in the ground with maybe a wooden frame in it, and then fill that with strong concrete to create a strong foundation upon which the house is built. So if something is foundational, it means that it's like a base level starting point, building block, important building block. Okay, so oral communication has been a really important sort of starting point for the development of human history. It's played an important role, serving as the first form of mass communication. Serving as, this is interesting, this phrase, if something serves as something, basically it just means that it is that. It's another way of saying is. Oral communication played a foundational role, serving as the first form of communication, being the first form of communication, but serves as suggests that something has a certain role or certain function. Again, here are some more examples of the use of that phrase, serve as, which is quite a kind of formal structure. Here's another example. Body language serves as the first form of communication between strangers. Body language is the first form of communication between strangers, but you could also say body language performs the function of first communication between strangers. So it serves as, it has that function. Another example, education serves as a tool for social mobility. Education performs the function of helping people improve their social status. That's social mobility. The garage serves as a storage space during the winter. The garage is a storage space. The garage provides the function of being a storage space. This meeting will serve as a platform for discussing future plans. Right, this meeting functions as a forum or opportunity for discussion. The statue serves as a reminder of the city's rich history. The statue performs the role of reminding people of the city's history, and so on and so forth. So that's serving as. In many cultures, storytelling serves as a way to pass down traditions. Right? It provides that function. Before the advent of writing, print or electronic media, societies relied on spoken words. The advent of writing, the advent of print, it basically means before the invention of it, before it started. Okay, before writing was invented, before print was invented, before the advent of it. Invent, I-N-V-E-N-T, to invent something. The noun is the invention of, but the advent is a different word, right? Advent, A-D-V-E-N-T, just means the starting point or the genesis of something, right? So before writing or print was invented or created or first started. To transmit information. Actually, as we go through this list of bits of vocab, you'll see that there are lots of different words here that can be used essentially to mean communicate or to say or to speak. In fact, I've got a big list of words here that all essentially are different ways of saying say or communicate. And transmit is one of them. You transmit information, meaning communicate it, right? We transmit other things as well. You can transmit a virus can be transmitted from one person to another as well. Again, quite formal language. So instead of saying to share information, it could be to transmit information. It's just quite a nice, alternative to just saying to say information or give information or share information. We've got transmit information. And, when you're trying to prove that you have a good level of English, sometimes using alternative synonymous vocabulary that is perhaps appropriate for an academic context, for example, is a good way of doing that. And saying transmit information can be a good way of broadening your vocabulary range, let's say. Historical examples that illustrate how collective oral communication functioned. To illustrate something is to kind of show it. So we often use examples to illustrate the point that we're making. Illustrate also means to draw a picture, right, with a pen or pencil or something. That's to illustrate. But examples can illustrate something as well, meaning show the point that we're making. So use examples to illustrate your point. Or in this case, historical examples illustrate how collective oral communication functioned. Stories were passed down orally. We talk about passing something down from generation to generation. So this generation passes down its stories to the next generation. Stories are passed down, or handed down is another way of doing it. Okay? Stories, culture, traditions, language is all passed down from generation to generation. Nice phrasal verb. By the way, I hope I pronounced all of those foreign language words reasonably well earlier when I was reading out that article. So, for example, the Mahabharata, oh gosh, how do I say that quickly? Mahabharata, the Mahabharata and Ramayana in India and the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia were initially conveyed through oral storytelling. Here's another one that means communicate, to convey stories, to convey ancient ideas. Transmit, convey, they're synonyms. I'll summarize all of the words for talking about communication in a moment. They recount genealogies. To recount something is to retell, to tell again and again and again. But you recount stories, you recount events, and in this case, you recount genealogies. Genealogies are family stories. Okay? These speeches delivered to large audiences were a form of mass communication. So you can deliver, obviously you deliver a letter, you deliver a package, but you can deliver a speech, you can deliver a presentation as well, meaning say it to everybody, communicate it to everyone. Next, leaders, politicians and philosophers would address the public on matters of state law and military campaigns. So not just talk to the public, say things to the public, but address the public, which means standing up in front of everyone and talking to them all formally. On television, you might see the president might address the nation, right? Or the prime minister might address the nation, meaning talk to everyone formally. The teachings of Jesus Christ were spread through oral communication. To spread teachings, spread a message, meaning, send it out so it travels far and wide, so it moves out in different directions to spread. Like the way you spread butter on your toast, information can be spread as well, far and wide. Like the teachings of Jesus Christ. Sermons, like the Sermon on the Mount. A sermon is a kind of religious preaching, a sort of speech by a religious leader, like Jesus when he delivered his famous sermons, including the Sermon on the Mount, which is where he said certain things like, what did he say? Love thy neighbour, the meek shall inherit the earth, and things like that. the Sermon on the Mount. Sermons were delivered to large crowds. So we have deliver a speech, deliver a sermon. Okay. This oral dissemination of religious teachings played a key role in the spread of Christianity, to disseminate information, to disseminate teachings. This is a synonym of spread, to spread it around, to send it out. Yes, disseminate knowledge, disseminate information, disseminate teaching, sort of spread it out, communicate it to a large number of people, far and wide. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad orally, and he recited it to his followers. So revealed, the noun is a revelation, right? When information is revealed. So Muhammad experienced a revelation where Angel Gabriel, was it? What's the name of the angel? Sorry, I did do some Islamic studies many years ago. Who revealed the Quran to? Yeah, the angel Gabriel. I thought so. While isolating at the cave of Hira within Jabal al-Nur, Muhammad was visited by the angel Gabriel, who revealed to him the beginnings of what would become known as the Quran. But it was done orally. This is the point. It was all done orally. It was revealed to him orally. And then Muhammad went on to recite this to his followers. It was all done orally. Right? His sermons and teachings were also delivered. There's that word again, to deliver sermons, deliver teachings, to deliver speeches. They were delivered orally and memorized by his companions. These are often shared during ceremonies, rituals and gatherings, to share something, right? In ancient India, the Vedas, the sacred texts, were transmitted orally. There's another word that means communicated. Transmitted. We've had it already, to transmit disease, but also transmit information. You can transmit a radio signal as well, of course. Vedic chanting. Chanting, this is the repetition of words or phrases or mantras or maybe religious texts. Chanting, repetition, maybe musical as well. Vedic chanting, a highly specialized form of oral communication, involved precise recitation of verses. Recitation is a bit like speaking aloud. And precise recitation of verses means that it was very precise, that it was recited or repeated or read out exactly correctly, using absolutely the right words, the correct words. So this was done during rituals and ceremonies. Town criers, going back to England, town criers were responsible for disseminating information to the public, basically by shouting the information in the street. These individuals would walk through towns loudly proclaiming royal decrees. So to proclaim something is to say something official, to officially state some new information, some news or some law. That is to proclaim something. The king hath decreed that smoking is not allowed in public spaces. The king hath decreed that smoking shall be banned in cafes. I don't think they, I don't know, what kind of royal decrees would it be? The king hath decreed that a tax must be levied on all milk-producing livestock. And everyone's, oh, come on! We've got to pay tax on our cows even more. That sort of thing. Royal decrees. A decree is a sort of law or ruling made by a king or an emperor, right? This form of oral communication allowed leaders to relay messages. So to relay messages from one person to another person to another person to another person, a bit like the relay race in the Olympics or in athletics, where people run around the track and they're carrying a baton, and that person runs 200 meters and then they give the baton to the next person. They relay it to the next person, who then runs with it and relays it to the next person. That's to relay messages, or to relay the baton in the relay race, but to relay messages from one person to another person. Okay, so that was vocab that came up there in that first article, first of 4 articles, and I think that I'll be able to get through the other 3 articles in this episode more quickly than I have done so far. We'll speed things up or take a bit more of an efficient approach. But so there you go. That was just oral communication and its importance in human history, and some vocabulary explained and summarised and recapped there. Okay. Now, when we look at vocabulary in context like that, sometimes it can feel like it's a little bit random, maybe. Obviously, it's all united under a certain topic, right? Which sort of brings together a lot of this vocabulary under a sort of topic heading. But it can seem a little bit random, where it's kind of like, seems a bit disorganised and maybe hard to remember. So let's categorise some of that vocabulary now. Some of it, not all of it. This can help to collect it all together in your mind. It's also worth considering collocations here. Still considering vocabulary. It's also worth considering collocations, meaning how these words tend to go with certain other words. Also, style. The tone of these texts here in this episode is academic, so a lot of the words are more formal than general words like say, speak, or tell. So we're looking at quite formal, academic sounding words. We can categorise them now and also consider what other words they often go together with. So first category, and I've just got basically 2 categories here. So words that mean to communicate or to speak. So we already heard some of this. Let me just give them to you in a list now. So we have to transmit information, to pass down stories from generation to generation, to convey stories and myths, to recount events and stories, to deliver a speech or a sermon, to address an audience, to address a crowd, to address the public, to spread teachings, to spread stories, also to spread rumours as well, to disseminate knowledge, to disseminate teachings, to reveal information, to reveal the truth, to recite texts or to recite verses from a Bible or verses from some sacred text, to share ideas, to share stories, to chant verses, to chant mantras, to proclaim decrees, officially announced new laws, to cry, to shout, to scream. So to cry, shout and scream are kind of synonymous, meaning to speak in a very loud voice. So often they're used to mean the same thing there. A town crier would be someone who comes and cries out in the street, delivering royal decrees, proclaiming royal decrees. There are slight differences as well. Cry could also mean cry like when you're really sad. Right? Okay. Cry like that. Why am I crying? Why would I be crying? I don't know. My England lost a football game again. Oh, boo-hoo. Cry, or to shout, oi, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I'm standing right next to you. You don't need to shout. Oh, sorry. I'm not wearing my glasses. Excuse me. To shout and to scream could be just to go, ah! Right? Not make a noise and just go, ah! But sometimes those words can all be used to basically mean say something in a loud voice. And to relay messages from one person to another, to impart moral lessons, which is just a formal way of saying to tell someone. Okay, so we've got like to tell, to disseminate, to deliver, recount, convey, transmit. All of those things more or less mean the same thing, but it's just interesting that they go with certain words and that they are more formal in style. We also have a few other words in another category. this next category, is things that people communicate to others. So we've had ways of communicating, ways of saying things, or words that basically mean to say or communicate. Now we've got things that people communicate to others, and that includes genealogies, as I said, family histories, sermons, sort of religious speeches, right? You imagine Jesus on a hilltop delivering a sermon to his audience. Sacred texts, obviously the Bible, the Quran, and these other ancient religious texts. Precise recitation of verses. Verses are specific lines in sacred texts. Okay, so these are verses. So you might, a page of a holy book would contain a few verses. Poems also have verses as well, meaning the sort of sections of a poem, but verses, lines of a sacred text. And royal decrees, which is like an old-fashioned word for basically laws passed by a king or queen or emperor. Okay, so that was collective oral communication and its importance in human history. But if you remember from the beginning of the episode, I was wondering about the fact that, podcasts seem to be comforting and reassuring. And maybe this is connected to human psychology and human history. So we've established the importance of spoken communication, listening to oral communication, and its importance in human history. Okay, but what about psychology then? Individual psychology and mental health as well. How about that? So this leads us to the second part of this, which is collective oral communication and human psychology. So my second prompt for ChatGPT, in order to prompt it to produce more English on this subject, was this: what is the importance of the tradition of collective oral communication, one person speaking aloud to a group, in human psychology? So I was wondering if listening to people speak can be good for our mental health because it taps into a profound human connection to the spoken word. Right? What do you think? Is it good for us, good for our minds, good for our mental health to listen to someone talking? Well, we know that it's probably good for our mental health to do a lot of talking therapy, therapy sessions where you talk about yourself, talk about your problems. It's cathartic. You express your feelings, and by doing that, give voice to feelings that were inside are now outside and have been expressed and to an extent fulfilled. We know that is a therapeutic thing, but is there also something therapeutic and mentally beneficial to the act of listening to someone talking, storytelling, or something similar? That's what I was thinking about. And here's the response. So, collective oral communication and human psychological and social development. The tradition of collective oral communication, where one person speaks aloud to a group, has been a cornerstone of human social and psychological development for thousands of years. This practice has profound importance in human psychology, influencing everything from social cohesion to emotional processing. Here are the key psychological aspects and benefits associated with this tradition. Number one, and by the way, of course, there are some bits of English highlighted in yellow, and I'll go through those after reading through this article. So, number one, social bonding and cohesion, shared experiences. Oh, and by the way, it's time to start another 30-second timer. Siri, set a 30-second countdown timer, please. Not 30 seconds, hold on. Siri, set a 30-minute countdown timer. Thank you. Okay, it's doing it. So, shared experiences. When a group listens to a speaker together, they share a common experience. This creates a sense of unity and belonging, which is crucial for social bonding. Whether it's a story, a ritual, or a speech, the collective experience reinforces group identity and strengthens social ties. Cultural transmission. Oral communication is a primary way through which cultural norms, values, and traditions are passed down through generations. This not only preserves the culture, but also ensures that individuals within the group understand and adhere to shared social expectations, fostering a strong sense of community. 2. Emotional regulation and collective catharsis. Emotional expression. Collective oral communication often involves the sharing of emotions, whether through stories, rituals, or speeches. This allows for a communal processing of emotions, helping individuals feel understood and validated within the group. For example, in mourning rituals or storytelling sessions that involve hardship, the group can collectively express and process grief, fear, or joy. Catharsis. When a speaker articulates emotions that resonate with the audience, it can lead to a release of pent-up feelings. This collective catharsis can be therapeutic, helping the group to cope with shared experiences such as trauma, loss, or even joy and celebration. 3. Cognitive development and learning. Knowledge transmission. Historically, oral communication was the primary means of passing down knowledge, from practical skills to moral lessons. The group setting allowed for repetition, reinforcement, and discussion, which are key components of learning. Listening to stories, speeches, or teachings in a group setting engages cognitive processes like memory, attention, and critical thinking. Moral and ethical learning. Through collective oral traditions such as parables or folk tales, groups often impart moral and ethical lessons. These narratives shape the values of the group, teaching individuals about right and wrong in a way that is more impactful when shared collectively. 4. Identity formation and group norms. Shared identity. Oral communication often involves narratives that define who we are as a group, whether it's a family, a tribe, or nation. By participating in these collective experiences, individuals internalize the identity and norms of the group, shaping their sense of self in relation to others. Role modeling. Speakers in these settings often serve as role models. By sharing their experiences, wisdom, or leadership, they help shape the behaviour and attitudes of the group. This is particularly evident in storytelling traditions where heroes or leaders exemplify the values that the group holds dear. 5. Ritual and tradition. Sense of continuity. Collective oral communication is often embedded in rituals that mark significant life events, birth, death, marriage, or coming of age. These rituals provide a sense of continuity and structure, helping individuals understand their place in the larger cycle of life. The repeated, communal nature of these rituals also reinforces the stability and resilience of the group. Psychological comfort. The predictability and familiarity of rituals involving collective oral communication can provide psychological comfort. Knowing what to expect in these settings reduces anxiety and creates a safe space for emotional expression and processing. 6, out of a list of 9 things, persuasion and influence, shaping beliefs and behaviours. Collective oral communication, especially in the form of speeches or sermons, has been a powerful tool for persuasion throughout history. Leaders, religious figures, and orators use this platform to influence the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviours of their audience. This is effective because the shared experience heightens the emotional impact and can lead to a greater alignment with the speaker's message. Collective action. By rallying a group around a common cause or belief, collective oral communication can inspire collective action. This has been key in social movements, religious revivals, and political campaigns where the spoken word can mobilize people to act together for a shared goal. Psychological safety and trust. Creating safe spaces. In many cultures, collective oral communication is structured in a way that creates psychological safety. For example, in traditional storytelling circles, group discussions or self-help groups, there are often established norms of respect and listening. This creates a safe environment where individuals feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and emotions without fear of judgment. Building trust. When one person speaks to a group, especially in a trusted role like a leader or elder or teacher maybe, it can reinforce trust within the group. The act of listening collectively to a respected voice can strengthen bonds of trust both between the speaker and the audience and among the group members themselves. Number 8, rituals and collective memory, cementing shared history. Collective oral communication often reinforces collective memory by retelling important historical events or shared stories. This helps cement a common understanding of the past, which is crucial for the group's identity and continuity. Psychological anchoring. For individuals, being part of a collective memory can provide a psychological anchor, grounding them in the group's history and providing a sense of stability and belonging. And number 9, engagement with the subconscious. Myth and archetype. Many oral traditions involve myths, legends, and archetypal stories that resonate with the subconscious mind. These narratives tap into deep universal themes and emotions, offering a way for individuals to engage with complex psychological concepts in a way that feels intuitive and meaningful. For example, the hero's journey in many traditional stories, and I would say here this includes all those examples I gave before, like Star Wars, Harry Potter, Legend of Zelda, Lord of the Rings. They share a lot of those themes, those archetypal elements that you find in quote-unquote the hero's journey. So the hero's journey in many traditional stories can mirror an individual's personal struggles and growth, providing psychological insights through symbolic storytelling. So, in summary, the tradition of collective oral communication plays a vital role in human psychology by fostering social cohesion, facilitating emotional processing, transmitting knowledge, and shaping identities. The power of one person speaking to a group lies not just in the content of the message, but in the shared experience of receiving that message together, which strengthens bonds, builds trust, and anchors individuals in their social and cultural contexts. But of course, you knew that already, didn't you? Especially you. So, that's very clearly put. I don't think I need to recap that, because I think it's clearly put that in various ways, strengthening the identity of a group, strengthening the personal identity of an individual within a group or within a tradition, within a culture, and also even subconsciously reinforcing certain, I don't know what, emotional threads through sort of typical adventure stories or stories of journeys, stories of heroic journeys. And so many of those traditional stories are like that. That kind of is almost on a subconscious level a way of giving voice to the personal, internal, emotional, psychological struggles that we all go through. We all essentially go through a hero's journey. And so it's quite reassuring and quite meaningful for us to listen to stories of someone going off on an adventure, having struggles. It becomes the journey of the soul or something like that. This reminds me of some of the things that were touched on in that episode I did with my dad about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is it's a medieval story, I think so, an old medieval poem, which is a sort of a hero's journey, an internal journey into the internal world, but also an external journey out into the forest. Essentially, all of those sort of epic adventure stories could be interpreted as an internal journey within oneself, to kind of battle your own personal demons and a search for truth, and ultimately battling against your own personal negative forces, and hopefully coming out victorious and learning and developing as a human. Anyway, let's go through a vocabulary list for the article there that I just read. So we talk about a cornerstone of human social and psychological development. So I talked about a foundation before, something being foundational, meaning a very important sort of basis. A cornerstone is another related concept. So a foundation is what you build your house upon, but a cornerstone would be a very important structural feature of your building. It is a large stone used, probably one of the four largest, most important structural elements of a building. The cornerstones, the large stones that go on the corner, a large stone that goes on the corner of a building, at the bottom on the corner. So it's a huge, important structural thing. That's a cornerstone. So very important for the development of something, right? This practice of storytelling has profound importance in human history. Profound means deep and powerful, right? Especially deep. Influencing everything from social cohesion to emotional processing. Social cohesion means making things together, making things stay together. Cohesion is the idea that things are all connected together, right? So when we say social cohesion in a group, it means the group is closely connected together. We also talk about cohesion in English. For example, if you're writing an essay or doing a piece of writing, text cohesion is one of the things that your examiner will look for. And, you know, when as English teachers, when we are assessing your writing, we look for text cohesion, the idea that the whole text structurally is well organized so that the ideas are all connected to each other, that you don't get ideas going off in different directions, that it all kind of is well structured and holds together with a logical progression, right? So social cohesion and emotional processing. Well, I think we understand that. Like, if you have to process your emotions, you experience your emotions, you go through a process of coming to terms with the way you feel about things. This is emotional processing. This creates a sense of unity. So unity means that people are unified, united, unified, to unite, and a sense of unity, that everyone is one single unit, all united together like a team, and a sense of belonging, which is where you feel like you belong in that group. Have you ever felt like that when you're in a group of people or you're in a situation and you feel, this is good, I feel like I'm where I should be, I really belong in this situation? And we've all felt the opposite, where you're in a group of people and you feel like you don't belong. You feel like you're an imposter. You feel like you shouldn't be there. You feel like these are not my people. I don't belong here. I need to get back to where I feel comfortable. And then you get back to, I don't know what it is, like your group of friends, and you feel like, this is much better. I really feel like I belong here. That is a sense of belonging. And oral communication can really help to create that sense of belonging and unity within a group, which is crucial, meaning very important, for social bonding. Social bonding is like social cohesion, but bonding is essentially like gluing. So bonding means making things stick together. And we talk about social bonding. We talk about bonding in a relationship. For example, if I spend time with my kids, if I spend time with my daughter, if we watch a film together and talk about the film, that's a good bonding experience, means it brings us closer together, right? That's bonding. Social bonding as well. Yes. The collective experience reinforces group identity, means it makes it stronger, and strengthens social ties. Reinforces, strengthens, they are, very close synonyms. You imagine reinforce makes it. We think of strength. When we say strong, we imagine strength in terms of being able to, let's say, lift something. If you say, oh, you're very strong, you'd imagine that person is able to lift very heavy weight. Group identity can be strong as well, in the sense that it doesn't break easily. But reinforced, I imagine something having a strong defense, right? Like a castle is reinforced, or a car, if a car is covered in reinforced metal and bulletproof glass, it's being reinforced, and it repels bullets, or it can't be damaged easily. Though I think of reinforced in that way. Reinforced glass is bulletproof, let's say. So they're slightly different. Reinforcing group identity, strengthening social ties. Social ties means social connections. Ties, you can think of rope tying things together. Cultural transmission, there's the word transmission again, to transmit, to communicate, to spread something. Cultural norms are things that are normal in that culture. Okay, cultural norms. For example, like in France, a cultural norm, this is just one example, is, for example, you kiss someone on the cheeks when you meet them, and it might be once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, depends on which part of the country you're in. It's all a little bit confusing, to be honest, but that is a cultural norm. But anything can be a cultural norm if it is just a thing that's normal in that culture. So cultural norms, cultural values. Values are things that are considered to be important, right? Things that are just considered to be normal, important. A bit like attitudes, like the importance of the family unit. This is a big value, an important value in most societies. Cultural values, cultural norms, and traditions are passed down through generations. There's that phrasal verb again, passed down. This not only preserves culture, but ensures that individuals within the group understand and adhere to shared social expectations. So to preserve culture, meaning to keep it, to make sure it doesn't kind of die. Normally you would preserve food, right? You could preserve food in oil, or preserve food if you like pickled vegetables. You put the vegetables in vinegar, I think it is, and they're preserved. They don't rot. So to preserve, animal remains, dinosaur bones could be preserved under the ground, and discovered later. But storytelling traditions can preserve culture, meaning make sure that culture doesn't die. And language as well. But also ensures that individuals adhere to social expectations. To ensure something is to just make sure that it happens. Okay? Ensures that individuals within the group understand and adhere to social expectations. To adhere to something is to stick to it. We've had stick before, meaning to bond. Bonding, meaning connecting things together, becoming close, like bonding in a relationship with your friends or family. But to adhere to something is to follow it, to stick to it, and not deviate from it. So you adhere to rules, you adhere to regulations, you adhere to guidelines. In this case, you adhere to expectations. So collective communication helps us to preserve our culture and make sure that individuals within the group stick to the expectations of the group, fostering a sense of community, helping something to develop. Emotional regulation and collective catharsis. Regulation means kind of like controlling emotions. if you can regulate your emotions, it means you can control them. And collective catharsis. Catharsis is the process. I think I mentioned it before. Catharsis is the noun. Cathartic is the adjective. Catharsis is the process of like releasing emotions that need to be released by doing something. Like, for example, doing sport is quite cathartic, because if you've got a lot of pent-up stress in your body, you go and do your sport. Maybe if it's like a fairly rough sport, like a game of football, where you bump into people and it's a little bit aggressive, that's quite cathartic. You get a lot of that aggression or stress out of your body. That's cathartic. Something can be emotionally cathartic too, like, for example, some sort of like a music session where you're in a group of people singing passionately. That's a good cathartic exercise as well, which can help you relieve stress. So collective catharsis. I mean, have you ever been to a cinema that's full of people and you see a really emotional film, and you can feel the whole room is moved by what they've seen, and that is extra moving. That's better than just experiencing it on your own. In my experience, I love going to the cinema where the whole room, it's quite a large room often, is really enjoying it. Or a comedy show, when you go and see a comedy show and there's quite a big audience and everyone in the room is laughing out loud all at the same time, all really kind of releasing a lot of emotion through their laughter as they all appreciate the collectivity of that moment where the comedian is expressing feelings and observations that everyone has experienced but never really put into words, and it all comes out through laughter and everyone shares the experience and you come out feeling fantastic. It's a very cathartic experience. Collective oral communication often involves the sharing of emotions. Involve is just one of those words that I often point out to learners of English, because I think that many learners of English in my experience don't really use it, but it's a very common word. Involve means be part of something, be part of a process. Collective oral communication involves the sharing of emotions. So if involve, it means it's part of it. So what does podcasting involve? It involves talking into a microphone. That's one part of it. It involves recording and editing and publishing. That's another part of it. It involves meeting guests and arranging interviews. That's another part of it. It involves conducting those interviews. It involves having inspiration, coming up with ideas, and deciding how you're going to do things. It involves that. It involves lots of different skills. Collective oral communication involves the sharing of emotions, amongst other things. This allows for a communal processing of emotions. Communal meaning you do it as part of a community. So community is the adjective, community is the noun, communal is the adjective. So you have communal swimming baths that everyone can use. They're not just private. Communal processing of emotions means everyone can process their emotions together as part of a group. Helping individuals feel understood and validated. If you feel validated, it's like you're being told that what you're thinking is true and good, and what you are is true and good. To validate something is to kind of go, yes, it's true and it's good. So if you feel validated within a group, it's like you're being reassured that what you think, what you feel, what you experience, the way you see the world is true and good. For example, in mourning rituals, mourning, that's mourning, not mourning like good morning, but mourning meaning the emotional experience that you have after someone has died. Right, so someone you love has died, and then you would go through a mourning. You would mourn that person. That's the verb, to mourn, and you would be mourning someone's loss, or you would be going through a period of mourning, or in this case, a mourning ritual, which could be a collective or communal ritual. some sort of custom, some sort of thing that everyone does together to collectively express their feeling of grief after someone has been lost. For example, in recent history in the UK, when the Queen died, there was a sort of a collective mourning process. Not everyone felt sad, because the Queen, not everyone believed in the monarchy or believes in the monarchy. But anyway, a lot of people were mourning the loss of the Queen, and there was a kind of mourning ritual in the sense that there was a state funeral, which was televised, and so that's a kind of mourning, a national mourning ritual. Storytelling sessions that involve hardship. Stories often involve hardship. Hardship just means difficulty, right? These hero's journey stories, there's always a sense of hardship. You think of Lord of the Rings, you think of Frodo's journey to Mount Doom to destroy the ring. There's a lot of hardship in that. Just carrying the ring is very tough, but also dealing with all of the adversity, all of the danger and the physical challenge of climbing up the mountain. So this is hardship, difficulty, things that are hard, experiences that are hard. The group can collectively express and process grief. So grief and mourning are synonyms, right? Grief is the feeling you have when someone has died, and to mourn is the verb, the thing you do when someone has died. You feel grief, you mourn. Catharsis, I've already talked about. When a speaker articulates emotions, expresses them, puts them into words, emotions that resonate with the audience. If something resonates, like a sound can resonate, meaning a sound sort of continues for a long time. For example, if you sing really loudly in a large church, right? Your voice will resonate because the space is so big, it really resonates so well in the church. That sound or music can resonate, but something can resonate with you emotionally. Emotions can resonate with you, meaning that they have a sort of deep feeling. They, in the same way that a sound can resonate in a space, an emotion can really resonate with you in your heart. So after you've seen a film, you can say, it really resonated with me, meaning I felt the emotions of it quite deeply. Okay. Trying to think of an example of a film that's really resonated with me. That moment when Luke Skywalker finally learns how to lift a spaceship out of a swamp using his mind. Yeah, that really resonated with me. I knew exactly how he felt in that moment. I didn't really, but it was a cool moment anyway. But I don't know, a moment that resonated with me. I can't think of an example, but there's lots of examples from films and stories where something happens to a character and you really feel it, and it really sort of touches you emotionally. You could say it resonated with you. It can lead to a release of pent-up feelings. So this is catharsis, right? The release of pent-up feelings. If something is pent up, it means it's held inside you and it hasn't been released. It's built up inside. We say pent up or bottled up. Emotions can be bottled up. Emotions can be pent up. Held inside, and they need to be released because it's bad for your health to have pent up emotions. You need to get them out. You need to release them. You need that catharsis. This collective catharsis can be therapeutic, right? That's a therapy and the adjective therapeutic. Helping the group to cope with shared experiences, to cope with them, to deal with them, to manage them, right? Shared experiences like trauma or loss. Trauma would be obviously something very traumatic, like, for example, I don't know, a terrorist attack in your city, which kills a lot of people and is very frightening, and people feel traumatized by it. So that's a trauma or a loss. For example, like the death of a public figure. There's my water timer again. Right? Trauma or loss. Historically, oral communication was the primary means of passing down knowledge, the means of doing it, the way of doing it, the method of doing it. The list goes on, listeners. The list goes on. From practical skills to moral lessons. Right, let me take a drink of water and let me have a little think for a moment. Okay, I'm going to have a little drink and a think. Drink and think. Here we go. Okay. I had a drink and a think. A drink and think. And here is the conclusion of my drink and think. It is this, that I'm going to skip past the rest of that highlighted vocabulary because it goes on and on and on. But I'll leave a little star, 3 little stars there on the PDF to show that this is where I stopped explaining vocabulary. I'm going to leave the rest and I will let you, if you want to continue, I really want to encourage you to research that vocab yourself. Just use one of the online dictionaries, Oxford Learners Dictionaries or Cambridge Dictionary. Which one is that? What's the full title? Dictionary.cambridge.org or collinsdictionary.com. Let me write those in here. Hold on a second. collinsdictionary.com. I'm going to put the links in. Dictionary.cambridge.org. Let's put that link into the PDF as well. And what else? oxfordlearnersdictionaries.com. oxfordlearnersdictionaries.com. 3 different online dictionaries which are really good. Oh, one more. I'm going to put in the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English Online. LOD. Longman Dictionary of Contemporary. Okay. LDOCE Online. That's the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English Online, which is a good dictionary for learners of English. All of the ones I've mentioned are good for learners of English, but the Longman Dictionary is just a bit more, let's say, sort of simplified, maybe gives you definitions which are in really easy to follow English. But all of those dictionaries can be good. So I'm just going to write on the PDF. Feel free to research or look up, let's say. Feel free to look up the other highlighted vocabulary in this list by using any of the following online dictionaries. Okay. And any other like online resources that you can think of to help you. But I'm going to skip past the rest of that vocab and try to kind of like move on and conclude the episode, because I'd like to move on to part 3, which is the psychological benefits of listening to podcasts, trying to make a connection between the tradition of oral collective communication through to the importance of it in human psychology and development. And now, the psychological benefits of listening to podcasts. My third prompt is this. How does this relate to the mental health benefits of listening to podcasts? And so at this point, I should say that there's no need for a vocab review for the rest of this episode, as a lot of the words are repeated from the previous responses. But I encourage you to notice words and phrases which we saw before. So I won't be explaining individual words anymore. We're just going to focus on the topic. So, the mental health benefits of listening to podcasts. Now, in order to save time here, I've taken the article which ChatGPT produced and I've condensed it into one single paragraph. Maybe I could have done that from the very beginning, but that kind of defeats the point. The point is that you get lots of English exposure in this episode. But anyway, to save time, one single paragraph, 2 paragraphs actually, to summarize what ChatGPT said in response to that. So, and it's this, okay? So, podcasts provide mental health benefits similar to those of collective oral communication by fulfilling essential psychological needs such as connection, emotional regulation, cognitive stimulation, that's basically brain stimulation, empathy. They encourage a sense of empathy as you are invited to enter into the subjective personal experience of the person talking to you. So empathy, which is a really important human emotion because it helps to connect you with the rest of the human race. So, connection, emotional regulation, cognitive stimulation, empathy, identity formation, and emotional comfort. Podcasts create virtual communities that reduce loneliness, offer emotional catharsis through shared experiences, stimulate learning and mental engagement, and foster empathy by exposing listeners to diverse perspectives. Actually, 3 paragraphs. Additionally, podcasts encourage self-reflection, provide a sense of psychological safety through familiarity. You're listening to Luke's English podcast. That sounds familiar. I feel an overwhelming sense of psychological safety. And they preserve cultural narratives and inspire personal growth, like maybe learning English, ultimately enhancing well-being in much the same way traditional storytelling has done for centuries. So there you go, just kind of that's what I was thinking earlier on. And there it is, explained in words. That's kind of it. But we haven't finished because I wanted to finally end the episode by talking about the mental health benefits of Luke's English podcast. So this is where my ego might have got the better of me because I wanted this all to be concluded with specific reference to my podcast. So please forgive another moment of self-indulgence, if you will. So this was the 4th prompt I gave ChatGPT. It was this. Can you give examples of this with specific reference to Luke's English podcast as a case study? So I was also curious to see how much ChatGPT knows about the lore of Luke's English podcast. There's that word lore from the episode I did with Amber, meaning the sort of the history, the shared knowledge, the shared sort of cultural language of Luke's English podcast. How much does ChatGPT really know this podcast? What will it say about the health benefits specifically of listening to Luke's English podcast? And will it be correct as well? Does ChatGPT listen to Luke's English podcast? Of course it doesn't. It doesn't have ears. And does it listen to the end and until the ends of episodes? Does ChatGPT listen to things? I suppose if you give it an audio file, it scans it and processes it. I don't know if that could be considered listening. Anyway, how much will it get wrong about my podcast and how much will it get right? And it's also interesting for me to get some perspective on my work and see what its overall impact is. If ChatGPT is a sort of very general kind of summary of how LEP is generally understood, I'm quite curious to see how much of a deep understanding it has of what I've done on this show. But anyway, the psychological benefits of collective oral communication exemplified by Luke's English podcast. Okay, here we go. So, this is how we're going to end the episode. Right, so Luke's English podcast is a great example of how modern podcasting carries forward the benefits of traditional collective oral communication, offering significant mental health benefits to its listeners. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? This is a very, I have to say, this entire exercise you could say has been designed just to make me feel good about myself. But you know, we have to do these things for ourselves sometimes. You've got to give yourself a lift, a bit of a psychological lift sometimes. But anyway, let's explore how this podcast serves as a case study by connecting its content and format with the key psychological principles behind collective oral communication. Yeah, let's do that. Why not? Number 1, social bonding and virtual community building. Social bonding and virtual community building. Luke's English podcast. Luke Thompson, the host, has built a strong community around his podcast. Through regular interactions with listeners, responding to their questions, and sharing listeners' stories, Luke fosters a sense of connection. His listeners often feel part of a global community of English learners, which helps reduce feelings of isolation. Is that true for you? Do you often feel part of a global community of English learners? You should do. I mean, after all, all of you are citizens of this made up sort of metaphysical place called Lapland. And that's Lapland, not Lapland. Lapland is a real place. I'm talking about Lapland, L-E-P, land, Luke's English Podcast land, there it is. That's where the global community exists. You are all Lepsters from Lepland. Does that help to reduce feelings of isolation? I think it does a little bit, to be honest. I mean, that's how I feel when I listen to my favourite podcasts. And my favourite podcasts, they have nicknames for their audiences and stuff, and it does make you feel quite comforted. I know for a fact that a lot of people started listening to my podcast during the COVID-19 pandemic, when people were really looking for a sort of sense of community and a sense of comfort. And I think a lot of people got it from podcasts, including mine. For example, Luke often reads out listener emails or comments in his episodes, creating a two-way communication channel. For many listeners, hearing their own or others' experiences shared on the podcast strengthens their connection to the community. This mirrors the social bonding that happens in traditional group settings, where sharing experiences builds a sense of belonging. So yes, you do belong as well. You do belong in Lepland. You do belong in this community of people who listen to Luke's English Podcast, because it's a special, rare breed of person who is a regular listener to this podcast. And if you ever meet another Lepster, which does happen sometimes, if you ever meet another one, then you're a part of a sort of fraternity of Lepsters. It's a special bond that other mere mortal humans don't share, and that is very special, I have to say. Secondly, emotional regulation and catharsis. Luke's English Podcast. Luke frequently discusses topics that resonate emotionally with his listeners. Yes, I do, don't I? Like what? I don't know. Well, such as the struggles and successes of learning French. What successes? It's just struggles. His candid and often humorous take on these challenges allows listeners to process their own frustrations and anxieties, which I suppose is another way of saying that when I talk about my failures in French, it makes you feel just a little bit better about your English. Example, in episodes where Luke talks about his language learning experiences or addresses common fears among learners, such as the fear of making mistakes. And I've got an episode coming up actually about fear and overcoming fears for a lot of things, but also for using English. So addressing common fears. Listeners often experience emotional release. Have you ever done that? Have you ever experienced emotional release while listening to your podcast? My podcast, I mean. Where you'll just be listening to Luke's English Podcast and then, oh, what was that? Oh, I think I just released some emotions there. Oh, I feel so much nicer now. Sorry, I was just listening to Luke's English Podcast. I don't know what happened. I just released a few emotions. Don't worry, I'll clean it up. Don't worry. The light-hearted yet empathetic tone of the podcast helps listeners feel understood and provides a form of catharsis, similar to how collective storytelling allows for shared emotional processing. Yes, that's what you're listening to right now. This is the light-hearted yet empathetic tone of this podcast, where I say things like this. Do you feel frustrated sometimes that you can't express yourself in English? Then buy my 3-month special course, which is discounted now to only €999. No, I'm not doing that. But you could sign up to LEP Premium on that point. But no, light-hearted yet empathetic tone. Yeah, I tell you what, it's a bloody nightmare, isn't it, learning a language sometimes? Oh, God, anyway, you got to just keep doing it, haven't you? Yeah, that was me attempting to demonstrate the light-hearted yet empathetic tone of this podcast. Yeah. Oh, everything's silly, isn't it? And I understand how you feel. There you go. Light-hearted yet empathetic. And suddenly, I just released some emotion there, all over the place. I feel starved. I'm hungry now after releasing all that emotion after listening to Luke's podcast. I don't know. Number 3, cognitive stimulation and learning. Yes, so much cognitive stimulation. You can just feel your brain just expanding, can't you, with every syllable. Luke's English Podcast. The primary focus of the podcast is to teach English in an engaging way. This is true, ChatGPT. You get the idea. Each episode requires active listening and cognitive engagement. So you do have to have your brain switched on. As Luke explores language topics, explains nuances. You do have to listen carefully for all those nuances that I explain. And shares cultural insights. This continuous mental engagement is beneficial for cognitive health. Well, that's good to know. Just one question, ChatGPT. Are you a medically qualified doctor? You're not? Okay. That's interesting. But you have consumed almost all of recorded human communication on the internet. And you've recorded all of it, and you've spewed out this as a result of essentially processing everything that's ever been written on the internet ever in English. Okay. Well, that's probably just as good, isn't it, as a medical degree? Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Anyway, for example, in episodes where Luke breaks down complex grammar points or explores idiomatic expressions, listeners are cognitively stimulated, aren't you? Yeah? You know that feeling you get when I break down complex grammar points or explore idiomatic expressions? You know that feeling you get, that sort of feeling where you're like, I quite like to have a little lie down. That feeling, that is cognitive stimulation in action. The process of understanding and applying this information parallels the cognitive benefits of learning through traditional oral communication, where stories and teachings are absorbed and reflected upon collectively. There you go, just in case you were in any doubt. And number 4, empathy and perspective taking. Through storytelling and interviews, Luke exposes his listeners to a variety of perspectives. That is the idea, I have to say. I try. Whether discussing his own life experiences or interviewing guests from different cultural backgrounds, the podcast fosters empathy and broadens listeners' worldviews. Well, that's nice of you to say that. It's a nice review, isn't it? For example, in episodes where Luke interviews guests or discusses his experiences living in France or Japan, listeners are invited to see the world from different perspectives. This promotes empathy, much like traditional storytelling, where hearing others' experiences enhances understanding and connection. All right. And number 5, identity formation and personal growth. For many listeners, especially those learning English, the podcast plays a significant role in shaping their identity as language learners and global citizens. Yes, you're not just a person learning English in the world, you are a lepster. And that means that you are something extra special, as we've already established. Yeah. Luke's encouragement and relatable stories help listeners navigate their own learning journeys and personal growth. Yeah, before you started listening to this podcast, you were like, I'm lost. I don't know. I can't navigate my own learning journey. I'm lost. And then I come along and go, don't worry. Here's a roadmap. Here's a map, a treasure map. Thanks, Luke. And now I can grow personally and navigate my own learning journey. Thank you so much. How can I ever repay you? Well, you could give me a PayPal donation. That would probably suffice. How? Oh, yeah, of course. A couple of pounds or something. How much? $100 billion should suffice. No one's ever done that, and they never will, because no one has $100 billion except. I'm not going to talk about who the richest person in the world right now, because it sickens me. Anyway. Example, Luke often shares his own struggles and triumphs with language learning. Triumphs? Yeah, I ordered a baguette and I got what I asked for. Yes! Which helps listeners reflect on their own experiences. This not only validates their challenges, but also encourages them to see themselves as part of a broader learning community. Much like how traditional collective communication reinforces group identity and personal roles within the community. Yeah, so if you ever struggle with your English, don't worry, you're not alone. Also, being a lepster, well, okay, ChatGPT understands lepster. Being a lepster should give listeners the sense they are part of a community with shared reference points attending live podcast recordings or LEP meetups can emphasise this feeling for listeners. Number 6, emotional comfort and psychological safety. It is a comfortable, safe space, Luke's English podcast. Yes, Luke's consistent tone, friendly demeanour and predictable format. Predictable? Okay, that could almost be a criticism. Very predictable. Anyway, it's not meant to be a criticism here. Consistent tone, friendly demeanour, predictable format provide listeners with a sense of comfort and psychological safety. Yes, it is a comfortable and psychologically safe place where you can sleep as much as you want. Regular listeners know what to expect, which creates a safe and calming environment for them. For example, the informal conversational style of the podcast makes listeners feel like they're having a chat with a friend, which can be very comforting, especially when compared to the strict and punishing environments in which they learned English in childhood. Which is actually true, isn't it? A lot of people, you do learn English in a strict and punishing environment at school where you raise your hand with what you think is an answer and the teacher goes, shut up, and throws a piece of chalk at you, and then, criticises you and judges you. No, that doesn't happen here on Luke's English podcast because I can't criticise you or judge you because I can't see you. Literally, I can't throw chalk at you because you're not in front of me. But if you were, I would punish you, and I wouldn't. Of course, I wouldn't. I'm just joking. I'm a very reasonable person. This sense of familiarity and routine is akin to the comfort provided by traditional rituals or storytelling sessions, where the predictable structure creates a safe space for emotional expression. How nice. And collective memory and continuity. While the podcast is focused on language learning, it also preserves and shares cultural knowledge, especially related to British culture. This helps listeners connect with a collective memory of language and culture, providing a sense of continuity. For example, episodes that explore British cultural practices, history, or social norms help listeners connect with a broader cultural narrative. For many international listeners, this deepens their understanding of English-speaking cultures, much like traditional storytelling that preserves collective memory and cultural identity. Ultimately, getting a deeper understanding of another cultural group helps us to understand that we are all basically the same. And there are always reasons behind behaviours and customs which at first might seem strange or nonsensical. Yes, that's a good point, isn't it? That is actually a good point. That we are all basically the same, despite our differences, and different behaviours and customs that might seem strange or nonsensical at first, they have their reasons for them. And although we are, in the real world, divided by all sorts of things, political distinctions, languages, geography, and all sorts of other things, it's important to remember that on the other side of that, just over there in a different country somewhere where they speak a different language, they've got a different flag. We're all just humans, aren't we, at the end of the day? We're all basically the same. We all have the same fears, the same needs, the same desires, more or less. It's important to remember that. Persuasion and positive influence. Luke frequently encourages positive behaviours. Yes, like be excellent to each other and party on. Such as perseverance in language learning, open-mindedness, and it's written this, curiosity and being excellent to each other. His positive influence helps listeners adopt healthier attitudes and behaviours, contributing to their overall mental well-being. You're welcome. Example, in episodes where Luke discusses the importance of not giving up or embracing mistakes as part of the language learning process, listeners are inspired to adopt a growth mindset. This mirrors the persuasive power of traditional speeches or storytelling, where the speaker's words can inspire collective or individual change. So you can just imagine me standing in some I don't know where, forum in Athens or Rome or something, with loads of robes on and a scroll or something, and just sort of like rambling on and just creating the foundations of modern democracy and collective consciousness with every word. I'm being silly now, but additional point. Here's an additional point I wanted to add at this point, which is this. I also wanted comments about the benefits of listening to spontaneous speech, which is something I often wonder about, like I did in episode 923 recently. I was wondering about whether listening to spontaneous speech rather than listening to pre-written text, but the act of listening to someone speaking spontaneously, whether that is beneficial. And I prompted ChatGPT with this, and this prompt really led ChatGPT in a certain direction. You can see it's a very leading prompt. So I wrote this. I said, how can listening to spontaneous speech benefit mental health? Include references to the fact that spontaneous speaking allows the listener to attune to the speaker's real-time mental processes, increasing the sense of connection. So I sort of answered my own question in the question. But anyway, ChatGPT said, listening to spontaneous speech can benefit mental health by fostering a deeper sense of connection between the listener and the speaker. Unlike scripted content, spontaneous speech reveals the speaker's real-time mental processes, including pauses, self-corrections, and genuine emotional expressions, which allows listeners to attune to the speaker's thoughts as they unfold. This creates an authentic human connection that reduces feelings of isolation and promotes empathy. Additionally, the unpredictability of spontaneous conversation can stimulate cognitive engagement, keeping the mind active and attentive. So you kind of, as you're listening to someone sort of expressing their thoughts as they're having them, it kind of keeps you on your toes. It means that you don't sort of drift off like you do when you're, I don't know, listening to someone reading something that they've written before. Somehow the rhythms of that become a bit sleep-inducing. But when someone is speaking without that, without pre-writing it, it kind of keeps your mind on its toes, if your mind has toes. Does it? It doesn't really. No, but sort of metaphysical toes. Yes. Hearing someone think out loud also provides a comforting sense of presence and relatability, reinforcing the listener's sense of belonging and emotional well-being, particularly in podcasts where hosts share personal stories, reflections, and unscripted dialogue. By the way, I should add, of course, because this is all just generated by AI, there are no specific sort of references to research that back up all of this stuff. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that this is all just stuff produced by ChatGPT. And I mean, I think it sounds pretty good. I think it sounds reasonable. It sounds to me like it's all based in truth. But this is not necessarily all, how do I say this? This is not all research based. I mean, I can't provide sources for all of these things. So we're just assuming that all of the statements made in these articles are true. But it seems pretty true to me. Anyway, I don't think there's any threat of there being fake news or anything like that, anything damaging like that in this episode. Anyway, conclusion then. Luke's English Podcast as a modern oral tradition. Luke's English Podcast exemplifies how modern podcasting can replicate the psychological benefits of traditional collective oral communication. Through his engaging storytelling, educational content, and community-building efforts, Luke creates a space where listeners can connect, learn, and grow, both linguistically and emotionally. The podcast serves as a powerful tool for mental health, providing listeners with the social connection, emotional support, cognitive stimulation, and identity reinforcement that are hallmarks of collective oral traditions. In essence, Luke's English Podcast is a modern continuation of the ancient practice of one person speaking to a group, offering all the psychological benefits that come with shared oral communication, but in a format that fits today's digital world. So there you go, just in case you had any doubts as to the benefits of listening to this podcast, as well as helping you with your English in many ways. It can also Create a sense of social continuity, regulate your emotions, give a feeling of catharsis, stimulate your mind, encourage empathy, help you form and grow your identity, give you a feeling of comfort and reassurance, improve your memory and other cognitive processes, and generally make you feel like a healthier and better human being. And all of that is backed up by traditions, customs and rituals which go back thousands of years into ancient human history. You're welcome. Whew. Right, listeners, that's the end of the episode. Well done for making it all the way through to this point. I think that I will leave it here. What more can I say? I think I've said enough. All right, now, let's see if you are still conscious. Are you a skeleton with headphones on? A skeleton just sitting in front of a speaker? Maybe you can just leave a comment about what? Oh my God, there's been so much in there. But we need a little code word at the end. What could the code word be? Oh, I don't know. God. I've no idea. I've got no idea. Something about... So we've got cognitive processes making you a healthier and better human being. So many things. What was the stuff that we had before that? Spontaneous. Let's have spontaneous as a key word. So that's spontaneous, spontaneity with an A in the middle. Spontaneous / spontaneity. There's your key word. Okay, that you've got to try and use that if you can. Don't worry if you can't use it. All right, don't worry if you can't use that word in your comment. It doesn't matter too much. But do leave a comment. I'd like to know your thoughts. And did this resonate with you at all? Right? Did any of the things that I said in this episode resonate with you at all? What do you think? Any responses would be fantastic. And that includes other experiences that you've had that perhaps back up the things that I've talked about here. So how does it feel for you? What other kinds of benefits do you get from listening to this other than improving your English? Does it give you a sense of emotional regulation? Does it give you a feeling of catharsis? Does it stimulate your mind? Does it encourage your empathy? Does it help you form and grow your identity? Does it give you a feeling of comfort and reassurance? Everything's going to be fine, don't worry. Does it improve your memory? Does it help you with your brain? Does it make you a healthier and better human being? And in what ways? I'd love to hear your responses, but that is the end of this episode. I'll be back again next time with an episode with a guest. What is coming up next time? Oh, yes. Next week it should be a long-awaited episode with a bit of a historical theme to it. I'll let you discover that one when it arrives. But for now, I will just say goodbye. Bye. Bye.